Welcome back to our special series celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. I'm your host, Bev Diaz-Kenyon. I'm an associate at Squire Patton Boggs. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Elizabeth Berthiaume, who, like me, is an associate and associate lead at our Juntos SPB group. Elizabeth is also heavily involved with the Dallas Hispanic Bar Association and was recently awarded the Estrella Award for her contributions. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Bev. Happy to be here. Happy to chat with you today.
All right, so let's just jump into it. I'd love to hear more about your background, your impressive background. Can you start by telling me a bit about your journey and how you became involved with the Dallas Hispanic Bar Association?
For sure. So I guess it begins with when I lateraled over to Squire Patton Boggs almost 3 years ago now. And there's an opportunity through the DEI program, the Latinx Resource Group, which is now renamed Juntos SPB, to attend the Hispanic National Bar Association's annual convention. It was the first time I had attended the event, and I went with a couple other partners. Didn't know anyone else who was attending outside of the Squire group. And, at one point I was at a cocktail hour event during the convention, and the partners had kind of broken off to go chat with some folks. And then, I ran into some kind of younger associates who are about my age, and we just got to chatting. And it turns out that they were all from Texas. They were part of the Region 12 group for the HNBA and had all kind of got together. And so I said, you know what, I'm from Dallas too. And so we exchanged information, so we hung out for the rest of the night and throughout different events that the convention had, and really kind of built that relationship. And, one of their pitches to me was, hey, why don't you get involved? We have, very active Dallas Hispanic Bar Association locally. We'd love to have you if you want to, devote time to committee or be involved. We're looking for any help that we can get. And for me personally, I've always kind of jumped on opportunities to be involved with either nonprofits or anything to do with like the Latinx community. And so that opportunity kind of presented itself. So, took everyone's information, and I reached out a little bit later and said, hey, yeah, I'd love to be a part of a committee. How can I serve? And through that, they plugged me into a special program under the Dallas Hispanic Bar Association called the Latina Leadership Program. And so it's a program that's been in existence for 7-8 years now, I believe. And the whole goal of the program is to provide networking opportunities and resources for Latina lawyers and law students. And so it kind of culminates with a kind of 4 or 5 hour long event every fall. There's usually CLE involved, panel of lawyers discussing various topics that are relevant towards Latina lawyers or law students. And it's a great way to provide training on various topics. So we've talked about things like negotiating your salary, talking about best practices when you're first starting out as a lawyer. This year, our topic is going to be about, making career moves. And so there's going to be a STEAM panel of very experienced lawyers talking about, what were the criteria for them deciding that they needed to make a jump, whether that was in-house to private practice, to academia, to government, what were some things to think about and consider when doing that. So that's sort of like an education program, if you will. And so I joined that committee through the Dallas Hispanic Bar Association and have been involved ever since. And it's just been a great joy to devote my time and network with these great women and meet, younger lawyers and law students who are just getting into the field and try and help them and provide as much, resources as we can.
That's amazing. And thank you for sharing that. I think it's a huge testament both to your dedication that you devote so much time to making sure resources are there for younger associates, but also to take the time for yourself to also use and benefit from the resources provided to you. And I love that story about HNBA. I know we really connected when we went to HNBA in Seattle last year, you, me, and Chris Lewis, another associate lead at Juntos SPB. So there's some magic in those meetings, in those conferences. So that's awesome. I would love to hear more about the Estrella Award. So what was it? What is the award for recognizing, and what does it mean to you to receive it?
Yeah, so for a little bit of background, I was awarded the Australia Award this past fall, and so we actually are at another award season, if you will. So that the next DHBA Gala will be awarding a new Australia awardee, if you will, in a couple of weeks. So the award is given to an up and coming Dallas Hispanic Bar Association member who has devoted, time and efforts towards supporting the Hispanic bar group and Latin lawyers. And so that award, it was, I wasn't expecting it. I knew it had existed and, keeping track of DHB activities, but it was something that kind of came out of the blue. Like I mentioned, when I met with a lot of the Region 12 members of the HNBA and the Dallas Hispanic Bar Association members and offered to help, I was just trying to get involved with the community and build connections and network and, really kind of devote like time and resources. So it didn't even occur to me that, something like that was on the table. So it was really surprising when I did receive an email from the Dallas Hispanic Bar Association president saying that, I had been chosen for the award. And when I was being introduced to receive the award in the fall, it was explained to me that there was several comments that were submitted about the work that I had done and how helpful I was. And, all these really kind things that you never quite think about. It's not something in the forefront of your mind, but everyone's like, this was so many recommendations came through for Elizabeth, there's no way that anyone else is more deserving than her for this. And so, all of that just really kind of warmed my heart because, you don't do these things for, recognition or with anything specific in mind. It was more of just to help where I could and, be involved and build connections. Because I think connections are so important in our community because oftentimes, we are first generation, maybe second generation here in the States. Most of the time we don't have other lawyers in the family. And so it's really hard for us to, explain some of the intricacies of working in the legal field or maybe the politics of working in a law firm or, the career journeys and considerations you need to make. Even like time constraints, family is very important in the Latin community. And so, the work we do is very demanding. And so having to balance that out and explain it and some of the pains and kind of growth opportunities that present there. So having, others that you can talk to and explain those kind of issues that you're dealing with and have them commiserate and understand, maybe give guidance or help or, just kind of build empathy and have that support system is really important to me. And so that's, being involved in that way and then receiving the Australia Award recognition, I was just so humbled. It was something that I wasn't expecting. And it was truly an honor. And, I just did what I felt that I wanted to do, what I thought was right. And I used my resources and my connections. Squire has been a great supporter of the Dallas Hispanic Bar Association. So we were able to sponsor several events for them and continue to do so this year as well. And it's just been, a fun time. And, it's great to be able to rely on my firm to be able to do these sorts of things and ultimately, gain the recognition and then pass it back up to them because I wouldn't be able to do the things that I do without having support from the firm, both locally here at the Dallas office and, larger firm decision makers who, actually do the approvals for budgets and such.
That's amazing to hear. And I think that your first thought is not the recognition, but it does have a huge impact just on kind of your understanding of what you're doing, the impact you're having on others. So that's really great you were able to experience that. So I will be going off script a little bit because I think I would be remiss to miss mentioning that you also were recognized for your pro bono work at the firm. Could you just tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, for sure. So I was an honorable mention on the Pro Bono Stars Award this year and for the work that I did in the spring and last year for various clients. And so within my practice group, there is a lot of support for doing pro bono work. A lot of our practice group chair and our other partners, they have really close relationships with nonprofits locally, wherever they are. Most of our partners are located in California, so they have nonprofits there that they relationships with schools who also have connections with nonprofits. And so whenever there's an opportunity to come through to provide legal assistance, and I'm in the data privacy practice group, and so usually has to do with terms of service, privacy policies, maybe guidance about website configurations to meet compliance requirements for consumer privacy laws. Whenever those types of projects come across their inbox, they'll forward off to us and say, hey, this is a great opportunity. Who wants to take it? And they're very supportive of us doing that pro bono work. And then the firm is also supportive of it as well. We get up to, I believe, 100 hours a year that go towards our annual requirement that can be used for pro bono efforts. And so I think that that is a, great motivator for associates to take on that type of work. So last year I did a couple of larger projects with a couple of different nonprofits. The first one is the Legal Accountability Project. They've been in the news recently because they are a nonprofit organization based out of DC, and they actually collect surveys from clerks who had recently done a clerkship, and they basically rate the judges that they had worked for and the work environment, usually on a scale of 1 to 10. They're basically looking to identify judges who maybe aren't providing the most conducive environment for students. Maybe if there's an issue with, being overworked, or maybe the judge is potentially harassing students. Maybe the judge have certain biases that no one quite speaks about or is aware about, because a lot of times when you're going through the clerkship process, some of those little gremlins you're not aware of. So if you're sending out applications and you get accepted, you don't know that maybe a judge has an issue with like a Latino lawyer. And maybe there's some of that bias there. And so then you land there and you get, run through some issues. And then, of course, there's the kind of nastier side of things where if there's any sort of sexual harassment, those sorts of more sensitive topics too. So the idea behind the Legal Accountability Project is to anonymously collect all these surveys about these clerkships that have occurred with various judges and put them in one spot. That way, law students, when they're searching, trying to identify which judge they would like to clerk with or where they should send their application to, they actually have a reference point. Instead of it just being hushed conversations in the back, it brings more light to these judges' chambers, and you can kind of figure out like what's the best space for you or what isn't. And so, as you can imagine, there's a lot of delicate issues with in taking that sort of information, presenting it a certain way to protect the identity of the person who provided the questionnaire. And then there's a whole host of legal liability issues too. People always worry about, what happens if the judge sues the nonprofit saying, hey, you lied about me, what sort of protections do they have in place? And then more boring things like terms of service that no one ever reads when you like on a website, terms and conditions. So my role there was basically drafting the terms and conditions of the service, the subscription agreement, because in order to verify that a clerk actually clerked for a judge, the nonprofit makes a relationship with a law school. And so the law school verifies that. That's part of the checks to say, yes, this is what happens. Like I can confirm Elizabeth clerked with XYZ judge. This is their year. And then that's it. So it's kind of like an extra check to be sure that you're actually getting like honest responses and not just someone randomly submitting a questionnaire. Did the privacy policy as well and advised on some kind of IP related issues too. So as you can imagine, it took a lot of work there, but it was a good time and very fulfilling. And even to this day, help them negotiate some subscription agreements between them and other parties. So very fulfilling, took a lot of time, but yeah, I was recognized by the firm for the pro bono was it honorable mention? So that was great to see too. Also a surprise.
Thank you for that. And I actually have come across the Legal Accountability Project as well, and I find it extremely important and also a very fascinating subject. So we'll have to talk more about that later.
Yes.
Back to kind of all the work that you're doing, it's clear you really love serving your community. And one of the ways that folks can serve the community or also receive resources and support is through mentorship. Can you share some insights on your approach to mentoring and why it is significant to you?
For sure. I think, mentorship is one of those things that everyone kind of talks about, but until you're actually in it, you don't quite understand like the full scope of it. So everyone says you need to have a mentor, but what does that relationship look like? What is needed? And so I think for me personally, when I'm thinking about mentoring younger attorneys or law students, it's always, my primary purpose is to be a sounding board to them, to kind of hear like, what are your concerns? Let me help alleviate some of that. Because most of the time you come in and you're just trying to get your feet under you. You don't know what's going on necessarily. You're trying to figure out, should I be worried about this? Should I not? Where should I prioritize? And like I mentioned before, they may not have, personal family resources that they can rely on to give them good perspective. So I think first step for me is just hearing them and saying, what are you concerned about right now? Let's talk about it. Like, what's on your mind? And from there, we can kind of work to providing, guidance if I've seen that scenario before. Like, yeah, let me tell you how I've handled it. Or maybe I've had, friends of mine who are my year or more senior who have dealt with something similar. And let me tell you how someone else has handled it too. And, here's some options for you. Or if you just want to talk, yeah, let's just talk about it, because sometimes you just need to get it off your chest, and that's fine as well. And, of course, if there's a need, if I have a mentee who has a specific need, whether they're looking for, different work or a job, or looking to get connected with someone who's in a different practice area, if I have those resources, always happy to shoot off a text and email, meet in person between them and somebody else to kind of build connections. Because I think that starting off building a network is also really difficult for younger attorneys. And so having someone who's a little bit more senior, but still relatable in age, kind of comes through and kind of be kind of a buffer in those scenarios is really great. I think for me, early on, when I started practicing, I had a mentor buddy, and we would go to networking events together. He was about 7 or 8 years senior than me, but we'd go to the networking event and he'd be like, oh, let me introduce you to so-and-so, and just have natural conversations. Like, he'd take the lead and then we'd chime in. And, that to me, it helped kind of break nervousness, especially when you're entering a room and you may not know anybody because you are so new to the area, so new to practice of law. Maybe you moved to a different city or state, and so you don't quite have that in yet. But once you're established, then it's like, flowing through water, just very, very easy. So having that buffer, I think, is really important. So I love to do that for my mentees. And, like I said, I kind of take that approach because that's the approach that's been taken with me. And even to this day, I have, mentors that I've known for, almost 10 years now. And so whenever I have something coming up, I'll send them a text, or I'm like, hey, do you want to talk about this? And, it could be male, female, different practice areas. Maybe they went in-house now, or, whatever it is. It's always great to have that different perspective. And I think lending resources in network is also super great too, because a lot of times, if you're trying to figure out the lay of the land, say, hey, have you heard about this? Have you heard about so-and-so? Have you heard about whatever is the topic at hand? Then they can say, oh yeah, here's a scoop on it. Or no, I haven't heard that yet. Let me ask around and I'll let you know. You get there more information that way. So having those resources is super helpful. And I find it very valuable. And it's not something that you don't quite think about early on in your career. You just know people say, hey, get a mentor, but you don't know what that means. So that's my approach in a nutshell, I guess.
That's awesome. And I think that it really shows kind of all the different forms that mentoring can take. It's really based off of, like you said, just listening to what is needed and adjusting based off of that. And yeah, I agree. I think my new advice to law students is to just start getting out there and networking. It's the last thing on your mind when you're a student, but to kind of exercise those skill sets and gain your network earlier is always just a huge plus and helps make the transition easier for sure.
I agree, 100%.
So you are also a member of Juntos SPB, and Juntos SPB is our firm's Hispanic and Latinx employee resource group, which of course is why we are all here today. So what has being a part of Juntos meant to you?
Oh my gosh, I've been involved in one or more iterations of Juntos SPB since I've been here at the firm. And I think that my impetus for wanting to be involved is building community. I think that, we talk about that all the time, having a support group and finding areas to bond with other, associates or lawyers or partners here at the firm, because Squire is huge. I mean, I think we've got 1,500 attorneys or so across, was it 40 different offices? I'm not sure. It's wild. Maybe it's 20 offices in 40 countries, something to that effect. But either way, we just have a large body of people here. And so being able to build closer relationships with your colleagues is very appealing, and it's very helpful because each firm kind of runs differently. And so to kind of give background to that, so I lateral to Squire from in-house, and prior to that I was at a regional kind of private practice firm. And so I've seen how other firms are structured, and so Squire is quite a bit larger than the first firm I was at when I first started practicing law. But everyone does things a little bit differently. Everything's structured a little bit differently. There's a bit of flavor, what firms require, outside of just the pure like hour requirement. If you're trying to be successful at a firm, there's a lot of soft skills that need to be developed, and the firm prioritizes certain things. And so kind of identifying how the firm functions and how to do your best at what the firm needs you to do, gaining that knowledge from other associates and partners, and having a mechanism for doing that is super important. And so Juntos SPB is one of those mechanisms where you're in a smaller group setting and you already have kind of a connection. You have that Latinx connection. So we both immediately have really similar like cultural backgrounds. And so we can, relate to each other on that level. And then from there, you can build on that and develop more of a closer relationship. And you can ask some of those questions. And it's kind of like a touch point to start a relationship. And then you can go deeper and get more mentors or mentees and develop things that way. And so I think that being a part of Juntos SPB, participating, I mean, we just build great relationships. And like Bev, you and I think we build a great relationship through that, and Chris as well, and some others. It's just a great way to get connected, because sometimes it can be hard to spread across all these offices. So I could say here in Dallas, we might have 12 attorneys, and I'm the only person of color here. So it's been really important to me to be a part of Juntos SPB, contribute where I can, attend the meetings. And, I also have a wealth of experience, being part of the HNBA and DHBA and, some of my nonprofit experience as well, that I can kind of contribute to, helping plan events and resources and whatever happens to be planning things. And so I think that those are kind of soft skills that, I'm happy to kind of push forward and also help show other younger associates how to leverage their skills too, because you can model it for them and then they can pick it up and run with it and be really successful.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely think that Juntos has been a way to shrink our world, if you will, make it feel a lot less overwhelming, and that we can, reach out and look for help, resources, or mentorship a lot easier because of that. So what has being a Latina influenced the work or the way that you approach your work in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I have to stop and ask myself that sometimes too, because, we do what we do and we don't even know why we do what we do, right? Or the approach that we take. And, I've had folks tell me, being a hard worker, always going the extra mile, taking ownership of things. And I think about my mother in a lot of those spaces, right? So she was very much all into it. It was either all or nothing. And so I do that as well. And having an extroverted personality too. And people ask me, Elizabeth, where do you get your sense of humor? And I said, oh, definitely my mother, like my loud personality and the energy, if you will, all comes from her. And so it's hard to kind of dissect and pull yourself apart and say, what's the origin of this? But I think that thinking to that side of the family and some of those characteristics, you can definitely see how that affects your work and how you approach it. Always working hard, doing your best, taking ownership. And then, also ultimately, I think that wanting to do the good work, because it also has to do with like your reputation and, not only me, myself, but also my family too, whom I represent wherever we are, right? We always think about that. Last names are important. That's why we tend to pile on our last name. So my last name is actually Elizabeth Spencer Berthiaume. We kind of shorten it for email purposes because that's a long name, right? But, all that legacy is very important. And I actually, I can't reach it over right now, but I have a picture of my grandmother holding my mother back in the 60s. It's a sepia photo out in rural Mexico. It's actually right here on my bookshelf. And so I look at it every morning and I think like, oh, how proud I must make, my family from being up here in the 41st floor of a skyscraper in Dallas, coming from rural Mexico where it was all jungle. So, I think about all of that. I'm very grateful and humble for where I am, but still looking for, next steps of where I want to go and reaching those goals. But ultimately, it's all for the benefit of my family and trying to honor the sacrifices they've made and trying to embody some of those hardworking reputation characteristics that are very important to them.
Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. And yeah, I agree with the last name thing. If you hadn't noticed. So what advice would you give to professionals trying to reach partnership at firms or kind of climb the professional ladder, if you will, who are also Hispanic or Latinx?
Yeah, so that's something that I'm still trying to figure out myself. I'm still an associate, and so I think that partnership is definitely the next level for me. And so I think that right now this is the part where I lean heavily on my network and my mentors in this space to try and understand what does it take, what's required, because a lot of times firms aren't really going to tell you. I mean, they'll have certain metrics for sure, whether that's book of business or maybe hours, but it's not something that's really kind of talked about because that's not just everything. There's some soft skills involved and some other kind of non-tangibles there. And so I think that, every firm does it differently. The decision-making process, it varies. And so I think for me, I've definitely been in that information gathering stage myself, trying to understand like what is ultimately needed. And I think that from what I can gather, book of business and then hours for sure. I mean, that's pretty standard wherever you go. But then you have like the soft skills. Are you investing in the firm? Are you a good firm citizen? Are you developing younger associates? Do you, even if you don't have a book of business right now, does it look like that you're able to bring that in? Are you doing networking? Are you involved in your local community? Are you doing things outside of, just keeping your head down and cranking out documents, which I think that can be a trap for many attorneys because they're trying to just, key into it. And I mean, that work is 100% important, but they're looking for the next level beyond that. Is kind of what I'm gathering. And so I think that how you show up in other contexts outside of just, producing good legal work, I think doing things like this is a way to kind of demonstrate the desire to be involved and to be a well kind of rounded person. It's not just legal practice, but soft skills and being able to invest in those under you and also recognize, the needs of those above you and ultimately be a support to, more senior partners. So I think that, that's a journey that I'm still on right now, always up for feedback there. I think for me, outside of kind of the partnership context, obviously doing good work is, good work gives you more work. So that's a kind of a standard across wherever you go, but then showing interest and energy to show that, this person, they're not just here to check a box. They're here because they want to be really involved and invested. And so because they want to be invested here, then we should invest in them as well. So that's kind of what I've picked up in my almost 7 years of practice.
That's great advice. And I think that it's also a great reminder that we're always learning and we can always improve. And while we may know more than we did yesterday, there's always more to know. It kind of goes both ways.
For sure.
All right. Well, I am mindful of our time. And while I would love to just continue our conversation forever, is there anything else that you would love to share about your experience of being a Latina attorney and a Latina professional in the legal field?
Yeah, I think that we are such a fun group of folks. I think that we're all looking for connections and we all have kind of a unity in our background. And so I would just encourage those, if you find yourself in that trap of where you're feeling isolated, you're not, don't quite feel like this is the right space for you, aside from the work, like, I don't know if I want to keep on doing this. I'd recommend reaching out to your local Hispanic Bar Association, whether that's through the National Hispanic Bar Association or if that's through something local, like we have the DHBA. But I think like building those personal connections is really as another layer on top of the practice of law that I think is incredibly beneficial. And it's very fulfilling because then you find a way that, I'm not just working on this agreement. My experience can help others in different ways. And there's something very satisfying about that, building those relationships, offering up either time or experience, because as you develop and grow older, you're going to develop all sorts of different skills too. So it may not just be, and not everyone needs a privacy policy, I'll tell you that. But there's other ways that I can contribute and provide help that are satisfying and immediate kind of gratification in that sense with someone who's sitting in front of me, sitting next to me, whatever it is. It's more tangible than shooting off an email to a client saying, here's your privacy policy. That's, a little bit cold and detached. But if there's someone there, you can say, hey, you know what, let me tell you about, what I did to study for the bar. When you're embedded in the legal field that way, I think that can kind of help if you find yourself in a rut. But, get involved and build connections and community, because ultimately that's going to help carry you through. And ultimately, if you decide you don't want to practice law anymore, then that's fine too. But you still have those connections that you can rely on, because you never know when you need somebody or if someone has a connection that might benefit from, what you know.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That is such valuable and important advice to keep in mind. Thank you so much for your time. And it's been awesome speaking with you. And I think that my biggest takeaway from this conversation is that next time I just click through that terms and condition box, I'll think of you at your desk, spending hours making sure that it is beautifully written for no one to read.
Precisely. Thanks so much, Bev. That's correct. It was such a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Great. Well, thank you all for listening and joining us today. Please join us next week for our final episode of our series. And if you have any questions or would like to get involved with Juntos SBB, please reach out to the Office of DEI.